Well, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, says partnership, innovative thinking, and discipline on the implementation of resources are critical to driving economic growth in Nigeria. Well, the Vice President and other speakers want efforts to be intensified towards tackling inflation and improving domestic production for the benefit of the exchange rates, wealth creation, and poverty reduction. Professor Oshibajo spoke at the 28th Nigerian Economic Summit, which is ongoing in Abuja. Coincidentally, it's important to note that inflation figures are expected in any time from now, either later today or tomorrow. Let's see if there will be an increase or a decrease. Or would this increase be so significant this time round? Well, joining us to understand both issues, he's an economist and tax manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Abiodun Kayode-Alli. Thank you so much. It's good to have you via Zoom today, not the normal you in the studio, but it's good to see you all the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Tolu.
Well, yeah, let's start with the Nigerian Economic Summit. It's the 28th edition of this summit, and it's ongoing in Abuja. Now, what do you think? A lot of talk. But this time around, they are looking at planning ahead of whoever becomes the CEO next year and all of that. What do you think should be the important takeout from this gathering?
Okay, thank you once again for having me, Tolu. It's interesting that we're having this virtually this time. Okay, so like you said, the most important thing for me would be action, right? And like you said, it's the 28th Economic Summit group that we're having, and we've had lots of it in the past. And the question is, by how much as most of these gathering or this roundtable committee, by how much have they been able to change things subsequently, right? So I think one key thing for me, which I've seen as one of the themes that is being discussed in that particular summit group, has to do with execution, right? So if you look at the themes, the thematic areas that are being discussed, one of them has to do with the improvement, delivering macroeconomic stability in such a way that it enhances shared prosperity. Another aspect of it has to do with investment in human capital, investment in the future. But two key areas for me, which is one of the things that you've identified, has to do with execution. Because if you think about it, there is this popular saying that we've become so conversant with in Nigeria, and that is that Nigerians were good when it comes to planning, but when it comes to execution, when it comes to implementation, that's where we kind of struggle, right? So execution is going to be a key thing. It's one of those themes, and it's something that I think going forward, we should actually take note of. But the question is, how exactly are you going to monitor execution? And that's where we have things such as performance measurements, right? There needs to be a kind of well-defined plan, as well as targets, right? Targets that are to be met. And there needs to be that kind of transparency such that the public are able to view what is being going on vis-a-vis what had been agreed. So I think that's a very key component. And the last thematic area, which is also being discussed, has to do with leadership. And it's good that all this is coming pre the election year. So those are the key things I think that we should be considering. The last two I mentioned, execution and also leadership. I think those are two key things that one should be paying attention to in this 28th Economic Summit group.
Well, it's a good way to start this conversation. Let's talk about information technology, ICT technology, and all that is expected from that space. It seems players in the industry want Nigerians to take advantage of this sector. Are we doing as much as we should be doing? And what can gatherings like this help to, create that better environment for that sector to thrive?
Okay, thanks for mentioning ICT. So ICT is actually very important, information, communication, and technology. It's quite key in these current times that we found ourselves in, right? And you can actually attest to its benefit, especially when you look at what happened in 2020, right? 2020 was a unique year for the whole world. And if you even consider that we're currently having this conversation via Zoom virtually, right? So a key thing that it can do is that it helps in bringing stakeholders together. That's one important thing. The current ongoing summit that is taking place in Abuja, if you even look at it, not all stakeholders would attend physically, but yet you could still get ideas, right? You could get ideas from people who probably have other assignments to do. But if you look at it in terms of the economy now, right, things have changed. You don't expect to do things the old way we used to do it. If you look at it in terms of banking, the banking sector, excuse me, if you look at it in terms of the banking sector, you don't do business by going physically to a bank, right? The brick and mortar. You don't do that any longer. You simply use your phone. You can send and transfer money. So a lot of things have changed. And a lot of businesses, especially the small and medium scale enterprise, which actually is the backbone for any economy, right? A lot of these small businesses, they've started carrying out transactions via using technology, right? And this has actually helped to create awareness for their business, and it has also helped in creating that kind of customer base, diversifying customer base, right? You can imagine what happened back in time. I think 2021, early 2021, when there was the Twitter ban, right? You can think about how it impacted lots of businesses, right? So I think in that regards, ICT is actually doing a lot, right? Both in terms of employment, also in terms of facilitating trade and transactions. ICT is actually doing a lot. And you can see that even from there's been different talks about taxing that particular space, right? It's actually doing quite a lot for us. There is also the what's it called, the excise duty that is being levied on telecoms, right? Because the government is seeing potential in that particular sector. So there is a whole lot that it can do in the development of the economy. And in the current times, like I said earlier, one of the thematic areas that is being discussed in the current economic summit group has to do with investing in the future. So if we are going to be thinking the future, we have to invest in digital technology, digital infrastructure. So ICT plays a very big role, right? And I believe that even when it comes to things like elections, I believe we're going to get to a point whereby we can even have those in the diaspora also casting in their votes, right? So it's very important. It will lead to the growth of the economy, and it would also lead to simplification and inclusiveness, right? That's what I believe. I think ICT plays a very key role.
Let's move on from there. And this discussion also around public-private partnership has come to the fore again. That's talking about government not being able to run all of this businesses or infrastructure development, one or two things without the private sector's involvement. But creating an enabling environment for the private investor is also something that is very important. So which comes first? And what do you think about public-private partnership in our country?
Okay, so the PPP model is quite key in any economy, very key in every economy, any economy, right? You've heard a lot of times that they say that government has no business in business, right? So you can't do it as well as the private sector, because the private sector is set up to make profits, right? So there is that drive. And if you think about it, the government doesn't have all the finances, right, to fund critical infrastructure. So that's why it's very key that you have that PPP model. And if you think about it, one thing that is quite key is also creating an enabling environment. So Tolu, if you think about the 2021 to 2025 National Development Plan, that plan on its own, it's actually private sector led. If you think about it from that perspective, think about it. First of all, the plan is expected to lift about 35 million people out of poverty. The plan is also expected to create about 21 million full-time jobs. Thinking about it this way, do you think the government is able to do all this? No, it actually needs the assistance of the private sector. And one thing that is quite key is that out of the expenditure that is expected for that particular period, 2021 to 2025, it's expected that 348 trillion is to be spent. And guess what? The private sector is going to account for 298 trillion. How are they going to get that money? The only way they can do that is simply by creating that enabling environment for them to thrive, right? Enabling environments in terms of policies, right? Ease of doing business, right? Ease of paying taxes, simplifying things, if a businessman wants to apply for a particular license, he should be able to get it with less bureaucracy. As long as all those things are in place, you will be able to see the private sector expand, right? You'll be able to see them invest in critical infrastructure. And by doing that, they will be able to achieve most of the goals that the government has set in terms of employment generation, in terms of poverty alleviation, and in terms of promoting social inclusiveness, right? So it's very key, because the honest truth is that the government doesn't have all the finances, but as long as it's able to create that enabling environment and work hand in hand with the private sector, it will be able to achieve all its targets in terms of economic growth and development. So I think it's actually very key.
Now, to talk about the big one, the elephant in the cupboard. We are expecting inflation figures out anytime soon. What are you thinking? I don't think there will be any decrease, truth be told. But what do you think? Will it be so significant in a shift that we'll see?
Okay, yes, I think the figures should be coming out today, anytime soon.
Yes.
What I would
I was
expect
thinking
is
before the program it would come.
Yeah, I was also thinking the same too. But to be quite honest with you, I don't expect a deceleration. I actually expect an increase. I mean, if you look at everything that is happening, the major drivers of inflation, they haven't gone away, right? In fact, things have even been worse with the impact of the flooding that has affected key areas, right? Key areas in terms of the food basket of the nation, Benue states. If you also look at areas whereby our oil regions like Bayelsa and Delta, right? The flooding has actually impacted such areas last month, right? And even currently, a lot of people being displaced. So I think that is going to actually aggravate inflation. Also, you want to look at global oil prices. They haven't gone down, right? You have Brent crude oil trading somewhere within the range of $92 per barrel, right? So things haven't gone down, right? And it's not like Nigeria has increased its production in such a way that it can earn foreign reserves, foreign exchange, right, to cushion the impact of imported inflation. So I don't think it's going to go down anytime soon. I expect an increase. So as at the month of September, we had it around 20.77% headline inflation. I'll be expecting something within the range of 21%. That's what I would be expecting. And I think one key driver for the current inflation is going to be food inflation, right? I expect it to go higher than, it's going to be within the range of 23%, but I expect it to be higher than what we had in the previous time. So it's interesting times that we found ourselves in, Tolu, and I don't see it going down anytime soon. And do you know one interesting thing, which I must say? I remember the first interview I had with you in January. The World Bank actually predicted at that point in time that Nigeria is going to experience one of the highest inflation rates, right? So I do think that we're actually getting to that point, given the things that are happening both externally and also internally. And to be quite honest with you, it's just sad that is definitely going to cause a squeeze, right, in the purchasing power of individuals, right? The vulnerable is going to cause a squeeze. So what we'll be seeing soon is that we're going to see a lot of people actually changing the way they feed, right? Because a lot of people actually spend about 50% of their income on food, right? So I think it's going to cause a squeeze in households and businesses. That's what I see, Tolu.
About flooding, which is actually important. But I would always want to still ask that issues around global economic issues, we are not insulated from all of the effects of this, and it keeps hitting us badly. And some say we might be heading for a recession. How scared or how worried are you? We've had 2 recessions already as a country in President Buhari's administration. Heading into another recession might not be the way to go at all. What are you thinking? You are the economist.
Okay, yeah, you're quite right. We've had 2 recessions, the first in 2016 and the second in 2020. But like you rightly said, Nigeria is actually not insulated from external shocks, right? The global shocks that we face. But if you think about the cause of the recession that we actually found ourselves in, the cause had to do with the first one in 2016 had to do with a drop in global crude oil prices, right? And Nigeria were actually heavily dependent on crude oil, and that's the major source of our foreign earnings, right? To the point whereby, like they say, if anything affects the oil price, or if what's it called? The oil price sneezes globally, Nigeria catches a cold, right? So as long as prices are still high within the range of $92 per barrel, right? I still think Nigeria can still sustain itself because, like you said in your news reports, right? Recently Nigeria has actually increased its production, its crude oil production. I think we've hit 1 million barrels per day, which is going to be like the highest in the past 2 months. Although it's still below the 1.8 million barrel per day quota that has been given to us by OPEC, but I think Nigeria can still strengthen itself. If you also think about the 2020 recession that we had, which was triggered by the pandemic, right, and a low demand for crude oil, prices of crude oil were trading as low as zero, right, even to a point whereby people were even paying people to take off those oil from them, right, going to a minus negative territory somewhere in April 2020. As long as the crude oil prices are still high, I think Nigeria can still take care of itself, cater for itself, right? So I don't see that worry of going into a recession anytime soon. And if you look at the last report that we had, right? I think the growth was somewhere within the range of 3.5 or 3.4%. So I don't foresee that recession, even though we've had other economies like the United Kingdom going into such. I don't think Nigeria will go into any such recession anytime sooner. So I think we're fine with that regards.
Before I let you go, this discussion around cost of governance is coming up again and even popped up at the NESG forum yesterday. I see you nodding already, and they said there's a drastic need to disincentivize top public office holders. This has been suggested that they need to clamp down on corruption, make office unattractive, and all of that. Do you think that could help us, particularly at this time when we grapple with revenue issues?
Yes, Tolu. So if you even think since we got the Orosai report, right, this issue has always come up over and over again, right? You see a lot of public officers, right, who are practically not being productive, right? Their productivity levels are low, and you have instances whereby there are duplication of functions, right? And this is actually eating into our revenue, our resources, right? And that's why we have to be thankful to some private organizations like Budget, who are able to identify lots of duplications, right, in terms of projects. Nigeria currently is going through a revenue crisis. Yes, you might say that there is a debt crisis. There is also a revenue crisis. It's two ways. And this is the point in time whereby you need to exercise fiscal prudence, right, in terms of our spending, because we know over time that there's been a lot of waste when it comes to government resources, right? And our deficit is currently going higher and higher. And if you look at our debt as well, right, our debt they are going to significant levels, 42 trillion in terms of debt, right? Even the recent deficit we talked about in the proposed budget for 2023, we're looking at something within the range of 10.8 trillion. And so, do you know the interesting thing? The Senate are even considering increasing that as a result, just to provide for the flooding, right? To fund it further by 200 billion, something within that range. So I think at this point in time, we need to be careful with the way we exercise or utilize our resources. So I do think to a large extent, there needs to be a way to kind of make good use of the public offices that we have, as well as different functions and parastatals, ministries, departments, and agencies that are actually doing duplicate activities. It's high time we kind of cut down that cost of governance, because Tolu, really, that's one of the ways we can actually reduce our deficits and fund that budget. So I do agree that a lot needs to be done. And I think one key thing I need to state, which was also identified at the NESG, is that when it comes to bureaucracies, we need to deal with that, because if you think about it, look at NAFDAC, for instance, look at Standard Organization of Nigeria. During the time that the Bread Association were complaining about the cost of doing business, they were saying that some of these agencies are actually doing the same thing. So I think it's quite key that we actually merge some of these agencies together such that we're being efficient, not just from a government or a public perspective, even to ensure that the private sector are able to do business easily and conveniently. So I do agree with you that a lot needs to be done with respect to public offices and departments and agencies.
Well, it's a good way to live it. I've been talking to Mr. Abiodun Kayode-Alli. He's an economist and tax manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much. And it was really seamless having you via Zoom. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tolu. Thank you.